Betrayal doesn't always arrive with a scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles at you across the dinner table, refills your wine glass, and asks about your day. Sometimes it holds your hand and tells you everything will be okay, all while quietly, methodically dismantling your entire world behind your back. I learned this truth on a Tuesday afternoon in the sterile silence of a bank manager's office, staring at a zero balance that represented not just my life savings, but 15 years of blood, sweat, and unwavering trust in the one person I believed would never hurt me. My name is Maya Thorne, and until that moment, I thought I understood the difference between love and partnership. I thought I had found both in my husband, Julian. We met in graduate school, two ambitious souls drawn together by late-night study sessions and shared dreams of financial independence. He was charming, brilliant, and utterly devoted to my success. Or so I believed. When I launched Thorne Capital, my boutique investment firm, he was my biggest cheerleader, my sounding board, my rock. He quit his own job to support me, handling the administrative side while I focused on clients. It was perfect. We were perfect. I built the firm from nothing, working 80-hour weeks, missing birthdays, sacrificing friendships, all for the future we were building together. Our assets under management grew to $50 million. Our reputation was sterling. Our marriage, I thought, was unshakable. Then came the audit. A routine examination by a major client triggered a deeper look into our books. At first, I wasn't worried. I knew every transaction, every investment, every decision. But the numbers didn't add up. There were discrepancies I couldn't explain, transfers I hadn't authorized. I dug deeper, my confidence slowly curdling into dread. The trail led to accounts I didn't recognize, in countries I had never visited. And at the end of that trail, like a spider at the center of a web, sat my husband. Julian had been stealing from me for 3 years. Not small amounts. Millions. He had created fake vendors, siphoned client funds, forged my signature on dozens of documents. He had used his access, his intimacy, his knowledge of my every habit and vulnerability to systematically loot the company I had built with my own 2 hands. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply looked at me with those eyes I had loved for a decade and said, "You were so focused on the work, Maya, you never paid attention to what was right in front of you." Then he walked out, taking with him not just my money, but my trust, my faith, and my sense of reality. The fallout was immediate and devastating. The clients whose funds he stole filed lawsuits. The regulators launched investigations. My reputation, built over 15 years, crumbled in weeks. I lost everything. The firm, the house, the friends who didn't know which side to believe. Julian vanished, presumably to some non-extradition country with a beach and my money. I was left with nothing but debt and a burning, cold fury that kept me alive when despair threatened to swallow me whole. The authorities caught him 18 months later, living in Costa Rica under a fake name. He was extradited, tried, and convicted. He received 12 years in federal prison. I sat in that courtroom, watched him led away in handcuffs, and felt nothing, no satisfaction, no closure, just an empty, hollow space where my heart used to be. 12 years. He would be out in 8 with good behavior. He would be relatively young, free to start again. Meanwhile, I was left with a ruined career, shattered trust, and a mountain of debt I would spend the rest of my life climbing. The system had failed me. Justice had failed me. But sitting in that courtroom, watching the man I loved disappear into a concrete tomb, I made a decision. I would not let this be the end of my story. I would not let him define my future. I would rebuild not just my life, but myself. I would become someone he could never imagine. And when he walked out of those prison gates, I would be waiting, not for revenge, in the way he expected, not for violence or confrontation, for something far more devastating. I would take from him what he had taken from me, his future. I spent the next 8 years becoming an expert in the one thing I had never understood: people like him. I studied psychology, criminology, the art of manipulation. I learned how con artists think, how they operate, how they choose their victims. I became a consultant for law enforcement, helping them understand the minds of financial predators. I wrote a book. I gave TED Talks. I built a new career, a new identity, a new life. But always in the background, I was watching him. I tracked his prison behavior, his conversations, his visitors. I learned about his new friends, his new schemes, his plans for when he got out. He was already planning his next move, already identifying his next mark. He hadn't changed. He never would. That was his fatal flaw. He believed he was smarter than everyone else, that he could always find another victim, another way to win. He didn't understand that some people learn, some people grow, some people become the very thing they once feared. I became that thing. I became his equal in every way that mattered. I understood him better than he understood himself. And I knew with absolute certainty that when he walked out of those prison gates, he would be walking into a trap he could never escape. The question was not whether I would destroy him. The question was how. I had 8 years to design the perfect revenge. I used every single day. The day of his release arrived with the kind of gray, weeping sky that suited my purpose perfectly. I had been tracking his every move for 8 years through prison records, through monitored phone calls, through the network of informants I had carefully cultivated. I knew his plans. I knew he was reconnecting with an old accomplice, a man named Victor, who had helped him launder my money the first time. I knew they were planning a new scheme, targeting a wealthy widow in Florida whose trust fund was ripe for the picking. He hadn't changed. He never would. That was his gift and his curse. I used that knowledge to build my trap. Through a series of anonymous digital identities, I inserted myself into their planning. I became Sarah, a woman with connections to offshore banking and a hunger for easy money. I fed them information, gained their trust, positioned myself as essential to their operation. Victor was easy to manipulate, greedy, and impatient. Julian was harder, more suspicious, but I had spent 8 years studying him. I knew his patterns, his weaknesses, his tells. I knew that beneath the charm was a desperate need for validation, for proof that he was still the smartest person in any room. I played to that. I made Sarah admiring, deferential, always slightly in awe of his brilliance. He ate it up. The plan they built was classic Julian, a sophisticated romance con targeting the widow, Maria, a 62-year-old woman whose husband had left her $8 million and a loneliness that was almost palpable in her social media posts. Julian would be the charming suitor, the attentive listener, the man who made her feel seen. Victor would handle the financial mechanics, creating fake investment opportunities, fabricating documents, moving money through untraceable channels. And Sarah would be the offshore connection, the final link in the chain that would make the money disappear forever. It was beautiful, really, a work of art, and I was about to become its curator. I let them get close. I let Julian fly to Florida, meet Maria, begin his careful seduction. I watched through the digital windows I had installed, reading their messages, listening to their calls, documenting every lie, every manipulation, every calculated move. Maria was kind, trusting, desperately lonely. She was exactly the kind of woman Julian preyed upon. She reminded me of myself 15 years ago, believing in love, believing in him. The parallel made my stomach turn, but it also hardened my resolve. I would not let him destroy another woman. I would not let him add another name to his list of victims. The night he was supposed to close the deal, to convince Maria to transfer $2 million into the offshore account. I made my move. I arrived at her house unannounced, a stranger with a folder full of evidence and a story she would struggle to believe. She opened the door, confused, wary. I told her everything. I showed her the documents, the recordings, the photographs. I told her about Julian, about Victor, about the plan they had built to steal her money. I told her about myself, about the 15 years I had lost, about the 8 years I had spent becoming the person standing on her porch. She listened, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, horror, and finally a cold, quiet fury. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. I told her. 2 hours later, Julian arrived at Maria's door, confident, charming, ready to collect his prize. He walked into her living room and found me sitting on her couch, a glass of wine in my hand, a smile on my face that held no warmth. He froze. The color drained from his face. "Hello, Julian," I said. "It's been a while." He looked around, searching for an exit, for an explanation. Maria stood behind him, blocking the door. Her expression was stone. "Sit down," she said. "We need to talk." He sat. I watched him. This man who had destroyed my life, who had stolen my trust, who had spent 8 years in prison and learned absolutely nothing. I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a clean, cold emptiness. I laid out his choices. Option 1. He could leave, quietly disappear, and never contact Maria or anyone else ever again. In return, I would not release the evidence I had gathered, the recordings of his conversations with Victor, the documents proving his intent to defraud, the trail of his planning. He would be free, but he would be watched. I would always be watching. Option 2, he could refuse, and I would release everything to the authorities, to the media, to every law enforcement agency in the country. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, a place he knew well and hated with every fiber of his being. He chose option 1. They always do. He left that night, a ghost fleeing a ghost. Maria watched him go, then turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. I shook my head. "You don't need to thank me. I did this for me, for the woman I used to be, for every woman he will never hurt again." We talked for hours that night, two strangers bound by a common enemy. She told me about her husband, about her loneliness, about the guilt she felt for almost falling for Julian's lies. I told her about my journey, about the 8 years of patience, about the woman I had become. We parted as friends, as survivors, as proof that the predators don't always win. I never saw Julian again. I heard through my network that he had moved to Europe, that he was keeping a low profile, that he worked a menial job, and told no one about his past. He lives in fear, I think, always looking over his shoulder, always wondering if today is the day I decide to end his fragile freedom. That is my revenge. Not his suffering, but his awareness. Not his destruction, but his containment. He will spend the rest of his life knowing that I am out there, that I am watching, that one wrong move and everything he has built will crumble. I rebuilt my life too, not the way it was before. Better. I used the lessons I learned to start a new foundation, one that helps victims of financial fraud rebuild their lives. We provide legal support, financial education, and a community of survivors who understand. We turn pain into purpose, loss into legacy. I still think about Julian sometimes, but not with anger anymore, with something closer to pity. He will never know peace. He will never know trust. He will never know the quiet joy of a life built on something real. I have all of those things. I have friends who love me, work that matters, a future that is mine alone. I have something he will never have, freedom, true freedom. Not the freedom to run, but the freedom to stay, to build, to grow, to live. That is the greatest revenge, not destroying your enemy, but becoming so whole, so complete, so powerful that they become irrelevant. He tried to break me, and in doing so, he forged me into something unbreakable. He tried to steal my future, and in doing so, he gave me the strength to build a better one. The last time I spoke of him was at a conference where I told my story to a room full of strangers. A woman approached me afterward, tears in her eyes. "I think my husband is doing the same thing." She whispered, "What should I do?" I took her hand and told her what I wish someone had told me all those years ago. Trust yourself. You are smarter than you know. And if you need help, I'm here. That is my legacy now. Not the money I lost, not the years I spent planning revenge, the lives I helped save, the women I helped protect, the future I helped build. Julian is a footnote in my story, a cautionary tale, a lesson learned. I am the main character, and my story is just beginning.